Hi everyone, I'm Carmen Bekker. Lovely to meet you. I lead the customer consultancy at KPMG, and I'm absolutely delighted today. Hearing the word customer in nearly every presentation has been an absolute treat for me, and it's the most important thing that I think about day in, day out. I'm here to pose to you some thoughts about customers and cash. And I wanted to talk to you about this because I think as we innovate for the demise of cash or for cash to disappear, we need to put the customer at the heart of this innovation. And I also love the conversation around regulation around the edges because I think we're seeing this in what's happening with cash. So in preparing for this presentation, I did a little experiment. I spent a whole week using just cash, and it was actually very difficult. It was quite distressing. And enlightening. It was very belittling, it was difficult, and I felt like a real hassle to people. When I went into a shop, I was guided to a single till on the floor that used cash and the only one. In a supermarket, I was pushed into a very long queue, the only place I could pay with cash. I had to actually go to the post office to pay a bill and line up to use the cash. And also my kids missed out on canteen that week because it's all done electronically now and there's no cash over the counter. So they were also very disappointed. I would encourage everyone who's involved in thinking about the future of cash to do this experiment because it really did make me feel I'm an able and capable citizen, and it made me feel very vulnerable. And I imagine how those that are vulnerable do actually feel. I would like to design a future where they are kept in mind. The trend over the last decade is clear. The forces of change around cash are increasing. The use of cash is increasingly marginal, and we're seeing the forces of change dramatically. Merchants and consumers are both preferring contactless payments and often eliminating cash payments, as I experienced. We're turning away from cash during COVID. We saw that with small signs showing in retailers saying we prefer to take cards because of COVID, and we're seeing this trend more and more. An acceleration in the growth of tap and pay, and customers increasingly preferring debit to credit. We're also seeing new payment methods in crypto and buy now, pay later, and also the greater use of digital wallets and big tech, topics that have all been covered today. The value of ATM withdrawals has decreased dramatically over the past 3 years, over 30%. And we're still seeing this on the decline. There's been talk about those that are being left behind. I'd just like to talk about a customer for a minute. This one is actually my grandfather. He's in his late 90s, but very able. He lives in a retirement village. He basically drives his mobility scooter between Aldi and the RSL, and that's about it. He gets cash out at the beginning of the week, and that serves him for the entire week. And he uses that in various situations that can give him a chance to talk to other people. And when I think about his need for cash, it's not just physical, it's not just to buy things. There's actually an emotional connection that he wants to create when he experiences his world outside his retirement village. And he's not the only example. When we think about people with disabilities that may or may not be able to lean into technology, we also need to think about how we handle them and what we do with them as we look for solutions to this problem. So in my world, we always think about what customers might want. And when we think about cash here, cash can still come to the fore in many circumstances. And this is an article, a clip and pictures from the AFR just last week. We saw shoppers having to fly in an ATM in order to help those customers that needed cash and were able to get some cash in a situation where they really couldn't. And these are the figures from the RBA where we can see that the ATM withdrawals are going down, yet we turn to cash and the ATM when we need it. In my world, customers and their behaviours are always well thought about, and so we did a small survey just 2 weeks ago, and we looked at what are customers actually thinking about cash, and these lined up with some of the thoughts I had. 30% said they'd not paid with cash at all over the past month. That's actually quite a high figure when you think about how many people that could equate to. 30% had not used it in a month. 10% of those couldn't even recall when they last used it. And 22% of those surveyed under 40 would prefer to use crypto or buy now, pay later if they could. So we found this fascinating because this growing political interest in security, reliability and cost of payments is what's driving this innovation in sector. I think it's interesting around electronic payments and the ATMs and what they're doing. We know that stores and we know that networks and electronic payments often go down, and big retailers often have one main provider, and then they have a backup provider. And this is something that small businesses just can't afford to do. And so therefore cash is the backup provider for small business. So we need to think about not only the customer, but the business as well. We all know ATMs are very important in this discussion, as we saw with what happened in Lismore. We know branches are being closed, ATMs are being moved or shut down. I experienced this myself when I did my experiment and I had to get cash out. As an industry, we can look to overseas to see what's happening to solve for this. And actually the Dutch banks are joining together. ING, Rabo and ABN AMRO have formed an ATM joint venture there on the image called GeldMat. They're removing all cash handling, ATMs from their branches, and they're collectively servicing this together. This is an interesting idea because not only is it good for the customer in that they still have their ATMs that they can go to when they need to, but it's also good for the banks. They're saving some costs because they've got common logistics and back end. This is one example of the sort of thinking that could help both the business, the customer, and also the banks. We've also seen at the other end of the scale, cryptocurrency. It was interesting just hearing that discussion earlier. They're gaining relevance and they're becoming mainstream. If you speak to anyone under 30, they are talking about crypto, they're in the metaverse, they have a digital wallet, and they're doing something that involves digital payments within the metaverse or with a cryptocurrency. What we saw just recently, this article came out just this year, NCR, the ATM manufacturer, has done a deal whereby they're able to now, with LibertyX, trade and move cryptocurrencies through ATMs. A really fantastic example of being able to bring crypto and Bitcoin one step closer to the mainstream. This is now available in over 750,000 ATMs. So imagine the changes that this could bring for us. So what do we think about a world where all of this is changing? I know that my mum, she asked me to always keep $2,000 or something like that just in case. Every girl should have it hidden somewhere. A 25-year-old in my team said to me that he wants to link his banking app to his Ethereum address, plus he wants to be able to seamlessly transact in the meta through his traditional banking app. I have to read this because I don't understand all of what he said to me, but he wants to integrate his wallet. So this is basically moving into the meta, but with your normal app. And he has one of the big 4 banking apps, and he just wishes it went that little bit further and linked his Ethereum address to it. He also said data security is very important to him, and also a record of his transactions, which is why he likes doing things that are recorded on the blockchain. My local coffee shop really likes Hey You, so that's how they want their payments, and my bakery really prefers cash. So at KPMG, what we use is the 6 pillars of customer excellence. These are the pillars that we've researched over time, are the things that customers really value when having an experience with a business, a brand, or a service. I think these are the pillars that we should look to when thinking about how cash will change. And I think we, as this industry, we should really think about integrity and empathy for those that we want to be able to keep up. It's our duty of care to listen to all customers. Whilst crypto and metaverse are a far cry from the sound of coins in your pocket, it still comes back to basics. Customers want this seamless, integrated, trusted, data-enabled transactions. They want things to be simple. So given the advancement that we're facing in our industry and the appetite for innovation that we've heard today, it's been an interesting experience to hear how many are thinking about the future and talking about it. We think it would be fantastic to put this vulnerable customer at the centre of your future state design. and create principles and guidelines that really include them in the future of the solution to eventually replace cash. Our customers demand this for us, and we know if we look after our customers, they look after us and our reputation. I really take pride in this industry, and I think it can be a societal moving force for change, and I think this is something we can do. We have the opportunity and we have the ability, and I'd really ask you to put the customer at the centre of all your decisions in order to help them and help society. Thank you.
Good afternoon all. So we've got a bit of a technology theme this afternoon. Technology will play a major part in the massive transformation that decarbonising the world economy presents. How we mobilise financial and human capital to facilitate the transition to net zero of our economy, our energy and land use systems is a crucial question in both a technical and social justice sense. In this quickfire chat, we will consider the extent of the challenge posed by Australia's net zero transition and broader sustainability goals, and the alignment required to optimise net zero and SDG outcomes, aligning the politics, the people and the capital. The federal government's technology not taxes mantra sees a technology-led approach to a net zero transition, and its recently released whole of economy plan to achieve the net zero emissions target by 2050 outlines several technology solutions and enabling initiatives, albeit many of the technologies that we hope will deliver are formative and not currently scalable. This view is reinforced by the International Energy Agency's recent roadmap when it postulates that most of the global reductions in emissions today between now and 2030 in the net zero pathway will come from technologies that are readily available today. But in 2050, almost half the reductions will come from technologies currently only available in the prototype phase. We need to consider technology in the broader sense here, not just physical assets, which need to be transformed across 7 energy and land use systems, which produce the vast majority of the world's emissions, being power, industry, mobility, building, agriculture, forestry and other land use and waste systems. We also need to consider soft technologies, the knowledge systems, regulatory frameworks, the policy, including tax and other incentives, which go to pricing, risk and investment returns, the standards and governance and information architecture, which all need to be aligned to optimise the transition in a technical way that brings people along in what is considered a just transition. We're seeing the money moving. However, without coherent alignment of policy, money and people, we risk inefficiency and a disorderly transition which can impede the transformation task. At our federation in 1901, we were global leaders in terms of per capita GDP, built proverbially off the sheep's back. Migration was growing rapidly, fuelled by the 1850s gold rush, and this was also the start of the time of the Industrial Revolution and the rapid expansion in the reliance of fossil fuels to build the global economy with its manufacturing, transport, telecommunications, and other interconnected networks. This has led to the global temperature increases that we're now seeking to limit, and which underpins the Paris Agreement goal to keep temperature increases to no more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. We have abundant natural resources, sunshine and wind, and innovative human capital from diverse sources, with 60,000 years of Indigenous culture and migrants from over 190 countries. Our population now exceeds 25 million people, and we have robust social capital foundations built on liberal democratic principles and the rule of law, connected to the global ecosystem and rules-based international order, which is currently under some stress. Today, we are a much changed country. The service sector dominates, with a large and sophisticated financial services sector critical for the financing challenge ahead. Our exports are dominated by extractive industries, with mining by far Australia's biggest export industry, accounting for nearly 60% of exports, with iron ore at over $120 billion per annum, and oil and gas and coal each $40 billion. 3% of our GDP and 13% of our capital stock is attributable to fossil fuel producing sectors. Whilst we might say our footprint is immaterial and we account for only 1.1% of global emissions, we are one of the top 20 polluter countries in terms of carbon emissions. And if you count our exports and contribution to Scope 3 emissions, we're fifth largest. Our position is therefore material and our leadership responsibility is important. Our fossil fuel exports also expose us to strategic economic transition risks in taxes or carbon border adjustments and other policy, technology or customer shifts. In terms of the scale of the economic investment for our 30-year transformation to 2050, McKinsey & Co, in its recent report on the net zero transition, estimates $275 trillion spend on physical assets for energy and land use systems over that time. That's $9.2 trillion per year needing to be spent on low emissions technology assets, some $3.5 trillion more than is currently being spent. And they also suggest that a further $1 trillion needs to be switched from high to low emission assets. To put that in context, Australia's GDP in 2021 was $1.37 trillion. The extra $3.5 trillion per annum equals half of annual global profits and 25% of total global tax revenues. A clear focus needs to be made not just on upscaling new low-emission technology, but also to support the progressive lowering of emissions in high-emitting, hard-to-abate sectors. Where there is no apparent low-emission substitute, there is a commitment to a robust and measurable transition pathway, and where no lock-in investment occurs, that is, investment that prevents the implementation of green alternatives in the future. The global financial system has a significant role to play here. Global debt capital markets with volumes over $100 trillion hold enormous power to support the transition to a sustainable future. Whilst greenwashing concerns exist, transition finance will enable shifts to more sustainable business models and gradual improvement. These include carbon-intensive industries such as oil and gas, iron and steel, chemicals, aviation and shipping. Such financing needs to be anchored in metrics and targets, but it is clear that we can't focus exclusively on already green sectors. The scope for transformation is much greater in helping brown activities or business models become light brown or green, and no business which can demonstrate a feasible and transparent transformation path should be excluded from sustainable finance. It is worth reflecting that sustainable finance itself is a recent phenomenon and is the tip of the financing iceberg, breaching $1 trillion in 2021. Green bonds, the oldest of the sustainable bond labels, have only existed since 2007, and whilst there's exponential growth in recent years, sustainable finance represents a mere fraction of overall corporate and household financing. Just this week at the AFR's Business Summit, Morgan Stanley's Chairman and CEO, James Gorman, in confirming its 2050 net zero target, outlined plans to do $1 trillion in sustainable financing by 2030, which would be driven by clients and their transition plans. We've had relative peace over the past 70 years, and probably more so since the fall of the Berlin Wall with the de-escalation of the nuclear threat. And global cooperation peaked with the coming together of 196 countries for the Paris Agreement in 2015. But the past weeks have seen the re-emergence of dormant Cold War threats with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, international sanctions, and associated volatility on energy and stock markets. This demonstrates not just the technical challenge, but also the real politic in finding global consensus and concerted action, and emphasises the need for our actions to have regard to domestic energy and security resilience. According to the International Energy Agency, there is still an achievable but narrow window to limit global warming to achieve net zero by 2050, but the window is closing quickly. So how do we get the data to help us formulate strategy, develop the right policies, and make the necessary long-term decisions and adjustments? Modern financial and management accounting has evolved with the complexity of the industrial and financial systems over the past 200 years. Meanwhile, carbon accounting is a relatively recent phenomena, and the standard for greenhouse gas accounting and verification, ISO 14046, was only published in 2006. Governments and major corporates are also being asked to make net zero commitments and accordingly must account for scope 1 to 3 emissions in their businesses and supply chains. Stakeholders are looking to hold them to account to such ambitions, and carbon is now a new currency. So accounting systems are having to evolve rapidly to incorporate this data. Incorporating non-financial or ESG data into strategy and decision-making processes is another recent development. With social and environmental concerns arising in the 1950s and 60s leading to the emergence of CSR, but only really being integrated in a systematic way in the past 20 years with the growth of ethical investing. Today, ESG factors are becoming increasingly important elements of corporate governance and the backbone of responsible investment strategies. Fortunately, we are seeing signs of convergence around standards and integrated reporting, building sustainability metrics into traditional financial reporting frameworks based on historic cost. The International Integrated Reporting Council and SASB recently announced a merger to become the Value Reporting Foundation. And the International Business Council has proposed a core set of sustainability disclosures to be included in mainstream annual reports, including metrics from SASB standards and other global reporting frameworks, as well as recommendations from the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD. Released in 2017, TCFD is a critical piece of information architecture and is becoming a mandatory framework for corporate climate-related disclosures designed to promote a more informed investment, credit and insurance underwriting decisions, and in turn enable stakeholders to better understand the concentration of carbon-related assets in the financial sector and consequent systemic risk exposures. In 2020, the Australian Sustainable Finance Initiative released its roadmap and action plan to 2030, comprising 37 recommendations for aligning our financial system with sustainable, resilient and prosperous future tied to net zero and sustainable development goals. These include measures to embed sustainability into leadership and operations and building sustainable finance markets, including development of green taxonomies, similar to that recently developed by the EU. Such frameworks and standards have immense leverage and are powerful tools in the process to slow the accelerating hazards of climate change. They are the backbone of climate action implementation plans and ensure stakeholders are comparing apples with apples, particularly useful for investors allocating capital and asset managers as they construct and manage portfolios. Standards also address the reporting, verification and auditing processes to ensure the integrity of the system and information flows. This highlights just some of the work at a global level on redesigning our information systems to embed sustainability considerations into corporate strategy, governance, decision-making and disclosure processes, and to promote sustainable financing technology. But this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of mainstreaming such information into decision calculus of governments, corporates and citizens, and bringing impact to the fore in all investment and procurement decisions. With decade-long lead times, we need to quickly increase and reprioritise spending on R&D, as well as on demonstrating and deploying clean energy technologies. We've seen many recent developments in these areas by governments, exemplified in New South Wales with a $500 million EV fleet package, regional renewable energy zones, and a massive battery project as part of the closure of the Eraring power station. Whilst a sector-by-sector-wide analysis of the technology opportunities for the transition is beyond scope, leading economist Professor Ross Garnaut has set out detailed pathways in 2 recent books, Superpower and the Post-Pandemic Follow-Up Reset. This includes seeing climate change as predominantly an S or social issue, social justice issue, with the need to build a bridge from policy incoherence to hope as we rebuild our economy with growth decoupled from carbon emissions. Garnaut sees Australia using its abundant natural resources to become an energy superpower, using such resources to value-add mineral resources and aid chemical manufacturers. He foresees utilising advantages in biomass to replace fossil fuels and a material uptake in biosequestration through improved land management technology. Garnaut identifies the drivers of the transformation as including the huge fall in the cost of equipment for many low emissions technologies, low interest rates and the consequent decisive fall in the discount rate applied to investment, which is critically important because many of the low emissions technologies involve mainly capital costs with low operating costs. The transformation of the global economy to net zero is a race against the clock where nations, corporations and citizens of all countries need to pull in the same direction. This requires the alignment of capital in all its forms, technology both in physical assets and systems, as well as policy, and a strengthening of our social capital and institutions to promote a transition that is as orderly and just as we can possibly make it. Thank you.